Hello, I'm Andrew Hall, and this is Dead Hand Radio. My guest for this episode is UFO researcher and author Preston Dennett. Preston has been studying the UFO enigma for over 30 years and has written over 30 books on various topics. Preston is a returning guest on Dead Hand Radio, and in this episode we're talking about UFOs in the desert and near bodies of water. Welcome back to Dead Hand Radio, Preston.
Hey, thanks very much. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you for being here, man. It's always a pleasure talking with you. You bring a wealth of knowledge. 30 plus years. How exactly long have you been looking into the topic?
Yeah, it's about almost 35 now, 34, but pushing 35 most of my life, really.
Wow. And you don't even look like you were old enough to start looking into this thing. I mean, you've aged well, so kudos to you on that.
Hey, thanks. I got involved when I was a pretty young man, 21, so that's part of the reason.
That's cool. Now, if you would, just for anybody that might not be familiar with your work, would you give a quick overview of how you got interested in the topic and some of the highlights of your, over the 35-year period, some of the highlights of your career as a UFO researcher?
Yeah, sure, thanks. I came in as a complete skeptic. I mean, really skeptical. I did not want to hear about anyone's sighting. But I heard a report on the news, and it interested me enough. This was, back in November 1986. It interested me enough to start asking people within my family, some friends and coworkers. Got a huge shock when I found out a lot of them, 20, 30% of them had some really close encounters, not just sightings, but even face-to-face encounters with grays, missing time, chasing UFOs down the road or being chased by them. So that threw me for a loop. It was devastating news. I was not happy about it. Went to the library to check out books and disprove them, and I was not able to do it. So one thing led to another. I started buying books on UFOs, attending conventions. Before long, I was interviewing people formally, and started to speak at conventions and go on the radio. I remember the first time I was on TV was the show National Geographic Explorer, I think, or Encounters. I remember Sightings called me. So yeah, things just started snowballing for me. I was in this field for about 10 years and had written some 30 articles. Now I've written well over 100, but yeah, 10 years is when I finally put out my first book about UFO healing cases. And since then, I've never looked back. I've lately been putting out a book or two per year. So I am not giving up on this phenomena. I'm obsessed. I don't know why I can't let go of it, but I can't. I think this is an important subject, and really pleased to see it's finally getting some real attention in the mainstream media.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you mentioned the way things are starting to turn and how you have not been able to let go of this topic, even though there were decades of, the media was ridiculing people about it, making fun of it, making light of it. It was just the military didn't acknowledge it. The government wouldn't even think about talking about it. But recently, within the last 3 years, it has started to a little bit at a time come to light. But within the last 3 to 6 months, it seems like it's just been a tidal wave of new information every single day. And I think about people like yourself and other researchers that have been in the studying this topic for so many years, decades. when I think about those things, I think that you have to feel a little bit of satisfaction now that everybody else is starting to catch up with what you've already known all along. And when I mean everybody, I'm talking about people who never even thought about the topic up until
Right.
this point, right?
Right. Yeah.
And real quick, let me just mention Julie. Thank you so much for being here. Please uh, feel free to drop comments and questions, and we'll definitely Preston will definitely take a crack at answering any questions that you might have. So I'm sorry, Preston. Go ahead.
No, I'm really happy to, yeah, to see all this uh, shows on the, I mean, it's on the news daily. And yeah, I've been in the trenches for a long, long time, hitting my head against a brick wall and getting a lot of ridicule from, even my family. Some of them just would not come around for a while. Now they pretty much all have. Uh, but yeah, I go on shows or conventions and there'd be debunkers, people attacking not only your research, but you personally. So it was difficult. And I remember when I got involved in this field, there was talk about disclosure, and it never happened. It never happened at all. There's been no movement from official government at all since I got in this field for decades. But now, yeah, just suddenly there is actual movement. So that is awesome. It's long, long overdue. Our government has been covering this up and lying about the subject, using our own tax dollars, spending the enormous amount of time, money, and effort to make UFO witnesses look like fools or drug users or liars when they knew full well from the very beginning that this was a real phenomenon. So yeah, I'm very excited to see, former President Obama make very positive statements on UFOs.
I saw that.
Senators.
I saw that
Yeah,
as well. That was actually a little bit surprising that he did finally come out and say that. What disappointed me a little bit was that it was on a talk show, and it seemed like the audience, as well as the talk show host, were kind of making light of what he was saying, and he was trying to be serious. And finally, he said, "Look, I'm being serious, and this is what it is." Um, and I was like, "Wow, good job, Obama, man." I mean,
right.
they were trying to make light of it, and he laid it down for them like this stuff is real. There's something to it. We're looking into it. Um, and kudos to Obama for that. Um, let's see. We're going to get an update also. We'll get back to the current events real quick. But Scott mentioned, I guess he saw you on Expedition X, which I wanted you to talk a little bit about. Since Scott brought that up, do you want to talk some more about that?
Yeah, yeah. I was recently featured on the show Expedition X with Josh Gates. That called me up because they wanted to do research, live field work on the UFOs and USOs on Catalina Island, which is a huge, huge hot spot. I've been collecting reports there since actually the very beginning of my research. So that's why they contacted me. They heard about, that I've been doing a lot of research there. And we did basically just a Zoom interview where they wanted to, talk about what I've learned. And yeah, I saw the show. It was pretty interesting because they were doing live field work with a lot of equipment, had cameras and all kinds of stuff out there to detect, and they saw actual UFOs. And what they saw is actually pretty incredible. I talked to some contactees to get their opinion on the footage, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that looks real to me," because you could see this glowing object that was moving in patterns that a normal conventional aircraft can't do. So that was really interesting. They're teasing out this show over a 2-week period. Part 2 is going to be on next week. But apparently they saw a USO as well, something under the water. So I'm not privy to what exactly they saw. I think they don't want it to be revealed until airtime. But I'm very interested to see, and what they did show so far is very intriguing, to say the least. And especially like some of the witnesses they got to talk to regarding, the whole Tic Tac incident, which was not far away from there. Uh,
right? There was also some footage, just since we're on that topic in that area. We're going to get into a lot of this a lot more later on, but there was a recent um, video released by Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp that showed some interesting footage that also took place down in that area. Did you happen to see that video?
yes, I did. Yeah, there's been photographs released from the Navy who said that they've had mysterious quote drones hovering over their ships out there. And yeah, this area is very, very active. Um, I know of several photographic cases, so it doesn't surprise me a bit that people have captured this on film, particularly the military. Uh, there's still a lot of talk back and forth about what these could be. Our government is saying, yeah, this is unidentified, but I think they're backpedaling a little bit on actually calling this extraterrestrial. So we'll see.
Yeah, I don't hear anybody coming out and saying that it is extraterrestrial. And even when the subject kind of goes in the direction of could it be extraterrestrial, people get a little bit uncomfortable and kind of backpedal a little bit at that point.
Yeah,
Um,
but I doubt
but
it's Russian. I don't think it's Russian or Chinese, and
and
I
that's the
don't.
same thing. That's the same thing everybody else is saying. It's not something that we have in our arsenal. We know it's not the Chinese or the Russians, but we're not saying it's extraterrestrial either. Hmm.
Yeah, I think the government's being a little disingenuous, honestly, because they know. If you look at the reports of crash retrievals, it's not just Roswell. There's quite a few of these types of cases. There are literally hundreds of whistleblowers who have come forward. And these are people of very high level within government, within the military industrial complex, who are saying we have crashed UFOs, we have the hardware, they've seen the alien bodies. Our government knows this is extraterrestrial. For them to say, no, 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 we don't know what it is. They know what it is. I think we all know. I mean, UFOs are not a mystery as much as perhaps they used to be.
Yeah.
There's a very good explanation for this. And I think the evidence which best fits the facts is extraterrestrial, people from other worlds.
Uh, well, I agree. I think it would be amazing if somebody would actually come out and confirm that. I think that it would be, a lot of people would feel a sigh of relief. Would say, okay, I knew this all along. Somebody officials finally coming out and confirming it. But those same people are also the people that feel like it's not necessary because I already know the truth. But that truth coming out by those authoritative figures would be good for the rest of everybody else that's not really into the topic as much.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's only fair that the leaders tell the truth and be forthcoming, truthful, and transparent, because they do know. And for them to, I mean, there is still a cover up. Let's face it. They are still spending all kinds of money and effort on not telling the truth. This is not speculation. The cover up is proven through the Freedom of Information Act, documents released through the Freedom of Information Act. And I am thinking that the government is being, forced into disclosure. This is not something they're doing voluntarily for the good of the people. They're doing this because if they don't, they're going to lose control over this subject. They're going to lose all credibility. They are being forced into disclosure. It's the way I think this is going down. But
Well, I mean, so Julie mentioned. Oh, hi, Julie and Luis and Christopher and Flora. I mean, we got a lot of people tonight in the chat room. Scott Brown, and I happen to know a little bird told me that it's one of the people in the chat room's birthday in 2 days. So I want to give a shout out to that person and say happy birthday. But I won't say who it is in case that person doesn't want it made public. But happy birthday to you. You know who you are. um, so let's see. Okay, first, we'll talk about the 60 Minutes episode here real quick. But Julie made a comment about Biden's statement recently, and you can argue that it was just a passing comment or a dismissive comment, but it was a statement. Well, he was asked point blank by a journalist at a press conference um, what he thought about Obama's statement. And I can't find her comment right now. Did you hear that? Did you see the statement by Biden?
Uh, no, I didn't. I heard that he was asked about it and basically retreated from the
Yeah.
press conference. I didn't hear that he actually made a statement. It's hard to keep up these days, which
Well,
is
his comment was, uh, I think you should go ask him again or something like that. And in my mind, that anytime a sitting president makes a comment like that, it is a statement. I mean, it's been all over the news. I think every news outlet has picked up on that and ran with that. But why do you think he would dismiss that question so overtly like that?
I am fairly certain, I don't want to say sure, but fairly certain that all the presidents do know about the UFO phenomena. They are informed to a certain extent. I'm not sure if they're fully in the loop, like perhaps George Bush was, who was the head of the CIA.
George W. Bush, right?
Right, right.
George Senior.
So I'm sure he knew quite a bit. And Kennedy, I think, well, that's a huge story there. But Gerald Ford, absolutely. President Carter, I mean, Trump made statements. And they're all always very, very careful and very cautious on their public statements on this. I think they know it's a hot potato. And as a politician, more than one politician has, lost their job over, becoming too forward or too, endorsing this subject. So it's a hot potato to say the least. And I think Biden, he's got, all the presidents have a lot on their plate. The world is getting it's a very, very precarious situation, increasingly so, I think, on a number of different fronts. And to bring in the whole UFO situation just complicates things immensely.
Yeah.
But I don't think they can run away from it anymore. I think, I remember when Trump was president, someone brought it up at a press conference to Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Like, what does Trump think about UFOs? And the entire, people on the press conference kind of tittered and laughed and giggled a little bit. But it was a very serious question, and she sidestepped it and said she'd get back to get back to him, and never did. So I really, really want, the political reporters who have FaceTime with President Biden to not take no for an answer and get an actual statement. Do you believe in this or not? Period. Yes or no. It's not that hard to answer.
Yeah.
Because that's what we need is a sitting president, a sitting world leader to say that this is real. That would be a huge, huge step in disclosure. And that hasn't happened yet because we've had, Jimmy Carter saw a UFO. Reagan did as well when he was governor. I mean, they were both governors, but they became president. We've had senators, we've had representatives, we've had governors. And that's just in the U.S. The Mexican president saw a UFO. There's many world leaders have seen UFOs and had UFO encounters. So we're right there. We're just inches away from this world changing in a big way.
Do you think Mr. Big DJG, Mr. Big, says as more senators jump on board, they can start threatening to pull money from these government entities, including the aerospace companies such as Lockheed? Do you think that that is a possibility? Do you think that is a tool in the toolbox of the Senate to be able to get answers for the American public? What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. They do have a very public platform, but government is very complex. It's very compartmentalized because senators aren't in office forever. I mean, many of them have term limits, not all. Uh, that's another thing that is a very much a hot potato subject. But as far as senators and representatives, well, the military is not elected. They don't have to worry about that. They have a black budget that is largely untouchable. So to a certain extent, they have a lot more power within government than perhaps the executive or legislative branch does. So it's very tricky. The NSA, the FBI, the CIA, and various intelligence organizations, they are the ones who are really controlling this subject. And I think the legislative branches don't have quite as much power as they do, but they do have a much more public platform, which is definitely a very powerful tool.
Luis, excuse me, Luis Jimenez asks, "Wait, what was the big Kennedy story? Did you mention? Did you mention Kennedy?"
Oh, yeah. Yeah, President Kennedy. I'm not an expert on this. There are some researchers who focused quite a bit on this. I believe like Grant Cameron is written on this, and some others, T. Scott Crane, if I'm correct. But yeah, I'm keeping up with it as best as I can, and according to the stories coming out about Kennedy, he was planning on disclosing. He knew stuff, and this is perhaps the driver behind his assassination, that he was ready to come forward and reveal that our government is in possession of ET technology, has had diplomatic relations with ETs to a certain extent, or something along these lines, and was silenced brutally. There is a brutal cover-up. There are many, many cases in which people within military have had an encounter, and they die under mysterious circumstances. I'll point to James Forrestal. The quote, suicide of James Forrestal was allegedly part of the MJ-12, the original MJ-12 group. But many people who are high-level witnesses find themselves shipped off to a foreign country. This happened to Sergeant Charles Moody, who had an encounter in New Mexico. And he was just a sergeant. And he had an abduction experience. He went public. But before he went public, he was talking to Jim and Coral Lorenzen, who are pioneering UFO researchers. They headed the group APRO, which was really the first citizen UFO group of any import. And they warned him. They said, if you go public, you will probably be shipped off to Europe or something. And that's exactly what happened. And we never heard from Sergeant Charles Moody again. To this day, I don't know what happened to him. And this is something we see over and over again.
Yeah, that's pretty scary. Now, it has been speculated that those tactics are outdated and they no longer use those. Are you of the same mind, or do you think they still use those kind of threatening tactics and disappearing people to keep this topic secret?
I think it depends when it comes to people who have really good firsthand knowledge of like crash retrieval stuff. Yeah, they will still use it. Leonard Stringfield, who's the crash retrieval expert, has a number of cases that demonstrate this, where airmen or soldiers have lost their lives after going public and died under mysterious circumstances. I think they're very careful to make it look like an accident, but I think what they will first try to do is just basically threaten you or buy you off, this sort of thing. Yeah, I am of the mind that there is still a cover-up. I think right now our government is so neck deep in this, that there's so much going on, that a lot of people are getting away with it. And Stephen Greer rounded up a bunch of high-level military witnesses, and Michael Salla is working hard. There's a lot of researchers on the front line of the disclosure movement, and giving a platform for high-level government and military-industrial witnesses to come forward. And if our government prosecutes them or threatens them, it calls attention to their story and actually lends more credence to it. So I think they're very reluctant to act against a lot of these people, because it will just bring attention to the fact that UFOs are real. So I think, they've painted themselves into a corner. They're having a real tough time right now trying to control this subject, because so many whistleblowers are coming out. The Roswell crash happened in 47, and there are very, very few living witnesses now to that incident. And so there's been a lot of deathbed confessions about UFO incidents. There was one at Vandenberg Air Force Base, Dr. Robert Jacobs, who was a missile scientist, rocket scientist, who was actually photographing a missile that was being launched from Vandenberg and had a UFO that circled it and sent little beams of light into it, and it caused the missile to crash. Well, his superior, Major Mansman, verified this incident on his deathbed. And that's a good example of what's going on right now. There's a lot of people coming forward saying this is real. And this is why our government has no choice but to disclose. And they're dragging their feet, and they're pissing and moaning and whining and complaining. But this subject, you can't hide the sky. I mean, you can't hide the sun and the moon. You can't hide the truth forever. It will come out, and it is.
Good points. So we're supposed to get a report in June. What are your hopes and what are your expectations for that report?
I'm kind of of two minds about it. I mean, I am super excited over what's happened the last 3 years. Yeah, I finally got vindication of people who said, "Oh, you're such a liar. You're just trying to get attention." Blah blah blah. No, I know that UFOs are hard to believe for some people. This is sort of like a core belief, like religion or politics, or it really affects people, and it can be very difficult to accept. So I understand skeptics. But as far as the government disclosing, I mean, now we've got the Pentagon saying that there are otherworldly materials. They said that flat out. We have material from otherworldly vehicles. That's huge. And that didn't get a whole lot of press. And now we've got this supposed announcement coming up. And part of me thinks, well, our government has lied for so darn long, forever. They have not been truthful, that I am a little jaded. I'm not so sure that I trust them. I don't trust them. I mean, I'm just going to say it. I don't trust them because they've lied for so long that they've lost, my trust in them. So I'm a little worried about how this is going to roll out. And I'm thinking that they're probably not going to reveal everything that they know. So I am happy to see that something is being said. I'm very happy about it. And I think that they probably will reveal that there are people seeing stuff they can't explain. But as far as calling it flat out extraterrestrial, I am not so sure they're going to go there. That's going to open up a can of worms. Because what about all the abductees? What about the Eisenhower meeting with ETs at Edwards Air Force Base that was allegedly filmed? What about all the gun camera footage taken by Air Force officers? What about another incident at Edwards Air Force Base where Gordon Cooper was there, the astronaut, and a UFO landed at Edwards and was filmed? People are going to start asking about that. We want to see that footage. Roswell, people are going to start asking about that. So they've got themselves into a real pickle here. They are between a huge rock and a very hard place. And I feel for them. But only to a certain extent.
Yeah, don't feel too bad for them, man. They dug their own hole. or made their own bed. Now they're going to have to lay down in it. So, real quick, Timmy E says, you have heard so many stories from firsthand eyewitnesses. In your opinion, what is the top priority of them? And I think he's talking about the ETs that are abducting those people.
Yeah, the ETs, I think, have multiple agendas, and there's multiple groups. I mean, we've got many. Grays is probably the most common, but there's many different types of grays with different agendas. There's human-looking ETs. We've got praying mantis. We've got strange humanoids of all types, very unique, that come maybe as like tourists, and then they're off again to who knows where. Reptilians, which I don't get a whole lot of. So that's a difficult question to answer. I do think the biggest concern of the ETs, they do seem very, very much obsessed with humanity, very, very interested in us, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, right down the line. But the number one message, and I don't care which ET group this is, because it's the same message with all of them, and it's been the same from the very beginning. When people first started claiming contact, it was in the 1950s with the contactee era. Howard Menger, George Adamski, Truman Bethram, Daniel Fry, Orfeo Angelucci, a bunch of these guys, all got messages about nuclear proliferation, our warlike ways, pollution. And when abductions became more popular in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and we started hearing reports of grays, they gave the same message as well. Same darn message. They are warning people about our use of nuclear weapons, saying that we don't know what we're doing. We're causing great damage not only to our world, but in other dimensions and other places we're not even aware of. So that seems to be their number one concern. I have yet, and that is absolutely the number one message given to contactees. Whitley Strieber got a message like that. Betty Andreasen, I mean, you name it. The ETs are very concerned about how we're treating our planet and how we're treating each other. So that, I'm going to say, is certainly their number one message. They also do seem to be pushing towards disclosure on their side. They want people to know about them. And why I say that is a couple of reasons. One is this is what contactees are being told. They are being told this flat out, that this is their plan to eventually show themselves at large to all of humanity. And if you just look at their behavior from a only the facts angle, how these guys are behaving, the ETs, we are seeing what amounts to a publicity campaign. It's obvious to me when you see events like the Phoenix Lights, for example, the Gulf Freeze wave. There was a wave in Wytheville, Virginia, the Hudson Valley wave. There was a super strong wave in France in the 1950s, a wave in Belgium. They just pick a location and they do a little publicity stunt and show themselves off. So that is absolutely one of their agendas. I wrote a book called Schoolyard UFO Encounters because I was intrigued by the aerial Zimbabwe incident, in which they landed next to Ariel Elementary School in Rua, Zimbabwe. And I knew of other cases where they've landed next to schools or hovered over next to them, like Broadhaven in Wales, the Prestview Elementary School in Opelika, Florida, the Westall High School incident in Melbourne, Australia. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There are more than 100 cases where they are hovering over schools for long periods of time during the day and showing themselves to large groups of children and teachers, for that matter. And that's another publicity stunt. They are doing this over and over again. And real quick, one more example of this is another book I put out because I couldn't believe it. UFOs at the Drive-In.
Yeah.
I thought there was just a couple of cases. I dug deep, found over 100. That's another weird UFO magnet. They come down, no kidding, and hover right over the screen, right next to the screen, in case after case after case. I've got more than 100 of them. Same thing. They're showing themselves off to a large group of people. In this case, 100, 200, 300. And not just hovering there, they will flash their lights, they'll emit smaller craft, they start doing all these maneuvers in a very much brazen, showing off type of behavior. So they're absolutely, that is their agenda, is to disclose. So those are, I think, their two main concerns, but there's many.
So you are relatively convinced. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I should say, how convinced are you that these are extraterrestrial beings? And if that is the case, are they from another planet, another dimension, or where do you think they're from?
Yeah, I think that is my assessment, is what I'll say. I think it is the theory which best fits the facts by far, far, far. Yes, there's other theories out there within the religious community, the fundamental religious community. Some people think they're demons, demonic. And there are many very well-educated UFO researchers who are not entirely convinced this is extraterrestrial. And this would be, I think, the second most popular theory, that there is some sort of intelligence out there that wears different masks and is trying to convince people that they are extraterrestrial, but are not. And I don't find the evidence for that very compelling. That those researchers point to the many symbolic elements within many UFO encounters, but I don't think that precludes these guys being ETs. There are people who think, oh, they're interdimensional. They are time travelers from our future. And there are cases you can march out that will support these theories. But even those theories, being interdimensional, well, we're interdimensional too. All entities are interdimensional. They have a soul, they travel to the other side. There is life after death. This is why I've had to look into paranormal aspects of this, because it's not just a nuts and bolts phenomenon. There is absolutely a strong spiritual aspect to all of this, or paranormal aspect. But just because something is interdimensional or time traveling does not preclude them from being extraterrestrial. And really, if you believe the whistleblower accounts like Roswell, which has some 300 witnesses and 50 books on that case alone, and it's one of hundreds of cases of crash retrievals, well, all bets are off. If we truly have the craft and the bodies, we know what these are. These are extraterrestrials. So I think really we're very, very close to proving conclusively that these are extraterrestrials. I mean, we have implant removal cases, hardware being taken from people's bodies that is inexplicable. So I think that, I am pretty much convinced. And I think we do know to a limited extent where they're from. Betty Hill, the star map, Zeta Reticula, that was a first real clue. But I have to tell you, it's not unique. Many, many people have been told that the grays come from Zeta Reticula. The Orion star system has been mentioned a number of times. Andromeda Galaxy comes up. That's not too helpful. That's an entire galaxy, so that's not too specific. But often ETs are very coy, very sort of dancing around the subject when people ask where they're from. And I've talked to a number of people firsthand who have asked the ETs flat out, where are you from? And they will get answers like, oh, it's not important, or we're from a place you don't know about yet, or you wouldn't understand, or, we're from beyond the moon. I mean, what does that mean? So I think they're sometimes reluctant to say where exactly they come from. I talked to a contactee. She was taken to their own planet and asked her, where are they from? And she says, I can't tell you. They do not want people to know. And I think the reason is because we have this technology. There's a very good chance we're actually flying some of these UFOs around and have the ability to go to other star systems. A number of whistleblowers have said this. And that makes us a very dangerous species because we are violent and we are warring amongst ourselves. I think this is what is stopping disclosure and open official contact is our own prejudices against people who are different. Uh, but we're getting close. I think we're this close to open official contact. I really do.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I have a saying that I like to throw out there anytime the issue of um, how humans treat other humans, and it's my strong position that we hate what we fear, and we fear what we don't know. So if you get to know something, if you know something, then you don't need to fear it, and you don't need to hate it.
Yeah, I think this is why UFOs and the Greys have such a bad rap. We're very fear-based. We're taught from a very young age, stranger danger, you know, this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
think if you,
it's also I believe, and I actually had somebody correct me on this, and I think they made a good point. But um, I believe that it's human nature to be that way. I mean, this is the way our species has survived and prospered for so many centuries or millennia, um, because we have that instinct.
yeah, it's a
And
brutal world. Yeah, there is
but
danger out there. I can see why people, do fear strangers because yeah, many people are struggling for survival.
but when when I was talking to this person, he suggested that that is actually not our nature. That is what is bred into us and has been bred into us for centuries, and that's why we are that way.
Yeah, I wonder about that because
Both are good possibilities, you know.
there does seem to be a lot of circumstantial evidence. I'll say going back through the millennia, through history up to modern times, that there has been extraterrestrial intervention in our species. And there's missing links. I mean, we don't quite know how we evolved. And now we're seeing the whole hybrid baby phenomena. There's a very strong interest in genetics. They seem to be very, very interested in our emotions
Hmm.
uh, and our ability to feel. So maybe there is something to that.
I
Uh,
think since we're on that point, what they're interested in us for, another thing that they're interested in is our psychic abilities. There's a lot of abductees and contactees that have advanced or um, you know better developed psychic abilities from the people that I've talked with. Do you feel the same way?
I absolutely do. Yeah. And that's something I've started looking more deeply into because as I'm writing, interviewing more people and uh, trying to look for patterns, I'm like, who's being contacted and why? That comes up quite a bit. It's, I'd say, a very consistent feature of who's being contacted are people who display um, various psychic abilities, whether it's clairvoyance or precognition or astral travel or channeling. And sometimes this comes prior to being contacted, but as often as not, these abilities are sort of woken up as a result of contact. And I have to tell you, a number of contactees have been told flat out that by the ETs that we have given you a spiritual boost. This is our gift to you for what you have given to us. And it's super common. Absolutely. People come away from contact with the ability to do hands-on healing or Reiki, channeling, psychic reading. One guy, he was an electronics specialist on a Navy ship. A very smart left-brained guy comes back from the military service and becomes a dowser, and very successful, by the way, and very decorated in this field of dowsing. So this is what we keep seeing. Past lives come up. Yeah, all It's the entire range of psychic phenomena. There's a very, very deeply spiritual aspect to this. And I like that because I think this speaks towards the ET agenda. People are like, "Oh no, they're evil, they're demonic, they're feeding off of our fear." I'm like, where's your evidence for that? Because if you throw all your preconceptions aside and look very objectively at what happens to people who are taken on board a craft, they're physically examined. That's very common, and that's probably the scariest part. But when I looked deeply into it, I found more than 300 cases of people who are healed, physically healed, no kidding, of everything from colds to cancer. And it's not just me saying this, it's every major researcher, almost without exception. And I truly mean that. Bud Hopkins had cases. John Mack had cases. David Jacobs, who doesn't necessarily think that this is good news for humanity, has many healing cases. They all do. Yvonne Smith, Barbara Lamb. I mean, I could go on. Healing is a very consistent feature. Edith Fiore, she was the first person with a PhD to write about abductions. She said half of her clients have been physically healed. So this again speaks towards the ET agenda. So they're healing people. They're giving us warnings about our planet. They're waking us up spiritually. Are these guys good news or bad news? I'm leaning towards good, because if you look at it objectively, people are coming away, improved for the better, for the most part. Not all of them. I'm not going to say they're all our space brothers, because it's a big universe, and some people do have negative encounters. They absolutely do. But generally speaking, I don't think they're here to take over our planet. No, they would have years ago. Would have been much easier years
Yeah,
ago than it
I
is
don't
now.
think it would have been much of a challenge to them to take over the planet. I don't think that is the situation. And the well, we went way down the rabbit hole and got off the topic of what we were initially going to talk about. But it's so far an interesting conversation, and you're one of the few people that I know who is willing to come out and say with a high level of confidence what you think these things are and why they're here. And it's somewhat, I guess, on your part, you would have to say it's somewhat speculation, but you have years, decades of research and investigation studying this topic, and have talked to possibly thousands of witnesses to this phenomena that lend evidence to support your hypothesis. Is that accurate?
Yeah. This is not really my opinion. I mean, to a certain extent, it is, but I have firsthand cases to back this up. And if they were pointing in the other direction, I would tell you. Because, I do get negative cases. I know people who've come back from their abductions injured with, very difficult problems, PTSD, nightmares. One guy I talked to, he came back with a broken foot. He was not too happy about that. So there are negative encounters for sure. But most of what I get is not that way. And I have the cases to back it up. Absolutely. And I think most researchers have a pretty good handle on what the ET agenda is.
Um, I'm going to ask a question from the chat real quick, but I just want to say to the people in the chat, you guys are on fire with the comments and the questions. If I don't get to your comment or question, I apologize for that. I want to give Preston all the time that he wants to take to talk and make his point. But if I miss your question and it's an important question, please repost it and just remind me that I haven't asked your question yet. So Timmy E says, I know about the negative encounters. What do you suppose the source of those encounters are? The negative aspect of the encounters. Thanks, Timmy.
I think when a person has a very strong fear response, they can take a very negative point of view. So to a certain extent, it does, a person's belief system plays a powerful role, and they can feel like this is a negative phenomena. And I've talked to people who started out like this is bad and came around. So I think that's part of it. Part of it is there's a bell curve of behavior among humans. Some humans are not nice people, period. They do not have empathy or sympathy. They're just not nice. They're very much self-absorbed, and the world revolves around them. And I think there's probably some ET groups like that as well. It's a big, big universe. And I think there are some Greys in particular who do not understand human emotion. They have bred this out of their genetic lines. They have suffered severe genetic damage, which has caused them they've lost the ability to reproduce or feel emotions. This comes up quite a bit. Not with all Greys. Some are absolutely what I would call loving. And people have told me that they've experienced great love from the Greys. But there are some, no, they do not understand fear. They do not, they have a job to do. They have an emergency situation. They need genetic material and they need it now. And they don't care if it's causing you pain because they don't understand or they don't care. So I think that's part of it as well. There's probably some real bad guys out there. It's a big, big universe. But I think it would be a lot easier to prove that humanity is a hostile species than, ETs. Because for example, if someone gets kidnapped here, almost never does it end well. It really doesn't. Whereas if someone's taken by the Greys, yeah, it can be very scary. Yeah, you might come back with bruises and scars and puncture wounds and PTSD, but you are returned, and often, well, maybe not often, but certainly consistently, people are healed, are woken up spiritually. I think this is sort of the reason behind a lot of missing time and amnesia is the Greys aren't wanting to scare people. That's not their agenda. I don't think we have any good evidence of that. I have pretty much zero accounts of what I would call sadism or deliberate torture. So, yeah, again, I'm not going to say there are space brothers because it's very hard to rationalize kidnapping someone out of their bedroom or down a highway late at night without permission. But on the other hand, I don't think that they're trying to hurt people. So
Well, Grant Cameron makes a great point on this, and he says basically the first time the ETs drop a nuclear bomb, then I'll believe that they're a threat to humanity. But we're the ones that have been testing nuclear weapons on this planet. We're the only species that has used nuclear weapons against our own species or against other humans. So the threat is us. That's what Grant Cameron's position is. I think he makes a strong point, and it sounds like you and he are kind of like-minded in that argument. I don't see a lot of evidence to dispute what you guys are saying. Um, Real quick, I want to get to a question from Timmy. Timmy seems to be the only one asking questions. So if you guys have questions, please put them in there. Um, but this is not a racist question, Timmy. It could be perceived that way, but it's not. It's a legit question. Um, but in 30 years of watching this phenomenon, haven't seen many black people involved. Now, if you're talking about black people that are researching the topic, black people that have been abducted or contactees, uh, that is just because you may not be familiar with people in the black community that have been doing this kind of work, but there are people in the black community that are doing this work, and it is on the rise. The number, just for an example, somebody mentioned Betty and Barney Hill earlier. I think Barney was black, wasn't he? And he was one of the first reported abductee cases um, that we know about. So, do you want to add on to that? Just there is a podcast if you're interested, um, and I cannot remember her name, but the podcast is Black People See UFOs Too, and the lady who runs that show, she's on Twitter, and I highly recommend you guys take a look at her work because she's doing some really good work about that on that topic.
Yeah, I've been asked this question before, actually, and I have to say, to a certain extent, the numbers aren't as equal as they should be. And I think one of the main reasons is just the systemic racism that has been present, particularly in the United States, for a very long time, and is still there. Uh, People who are marginalized don't have a platform to talk about what's happening to them. So I think that's one reason. But actually, I don't think that is actually true. I have to tell you, in each book I've written in which people have had extensive contact, there are people of color in the books I've written, like onboard UFO encounters. One guy I interviewed, Jay Gardner. He's black, and he's had very, very extensive encounters. My book, Extraterrestrial Visitations, one chapter featured Pat Brown, a wonderful black woman who had contact after going to visit a channeler who said he was channeling aliens. And she said, "Oh, if that's true, I'd like to go on your ship." Next thing she knows, she's having full-on abductions by gray-type ETs. So it is. The ETs are not prejudiced. They will visit anybody and do. I've talked to people of pretty much every race, whether it's Latino or Pacific Islander or Asian or black or what have you. All of them have had encounters. I've tried to see if there's a pattern to who's having encounters and why, and it's not race. I can tell you that. Everyone's having encounters. It's not blood type. It's not just Rh negative. Nope. It's not specifically men or women. It's equally divided there. It's not age. It's not education. It's not religion. I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. They're all getting abducted. I did find some patterns. There are 2 or 3 main patterns. One is if you're living in a UFO hotspot, that increases your chances. Another is if you have a history of UFO contact in your family. They are absolutely following genetic lines, and fully 50%, maybe even up to 60 or 70 of the people I've interviewed who've been taken on board a craft have it in their family. Their parents had experiences, their grandparents, an aunt, their children are having experiences. They follow genetic lines. But one pattern I found, and this really surprised me, and I was pretty reluctant at first to believe this, but it kept turning up. People who are having contact are people who are doing good work for humanity in some capacity. And by that, I mean musicians, doctors, social rights activists, environmentalists, inventors, teachers, inventors, police officers. There is a high incidence of these professions within the abduction community. And I always ask people, and I'm very sure to ask them their profession, what do they do for a living? And it comes up often enough that I'm like, wow, there is something to this. So that is another pattern I've noticed. But yeah, I think Black people have been marginalized in a lot of areas of society, and this is one of them.
Okay, so Santa Maria 5248, and she outed herself earlier that this is she's the one whose birthday it is today. So or not today, but coming up very soon. So for her birthday early present, let her answer your question, answer her question. What do you think about the 60 Minutes episode that just aired?
Well, happy solar revolution. That's awesome.
Cool.
Another
Very
year around
cool.
the sun. Yeah, the 16 Minutes episode was great to see it on 60 Minutes. I mean, that was awesome to see this subject actually on a serious news show, not a talk show, not a show where they give you purple lights and weird, hypnotizing white and black lines and tilt you at an angle or bringing on a debunker. They were taking it very seriously. I was a little disappointed in that I didn't really learn anything new, but I have to give them kudos for actually marching out some very high level military witnesses who are pretty much impossible to debunk. I mean, you can go ahead and try, but these are trained observers who are very familiar with aircraft and have been in this, military for years and years and know what aircraft look like and are still not able to identify what they saw. So that was really cool. I still think they're missing the boat a little bit. There's a lot more stuff that they have not covered. People, let's see the Roswell craft. I mean, let's dig deep. Let's get to the real meat of this and corner some people who have, there's physical evidence out there. Let's get that. That still has to be brought into the public arena. Let's talk about the implant removal cases. There's a lot of stuff that's really not getting the attention it deserves.
Well, another thing, and you made a good point that they brought out credible witnesses that are very difficult, if not impossible, to debunk. But they also need to add to the conversation because we're talking mainstream news sources. They need to add researchers that have been looking into this topic for as long as you have, such as yourself and Grant Cameron and Richard Dolan and those, researchers that have been in this field looking into this topic for so many years. They need to bring those guys in and hear their perspective on things. But I agree with you that they're doing it smart. They're rolling it out a little bit at a time, and I think it's to get people comfortable with the idea that this is a reality and things are the reality, the perception of reality is going to change. Reality is not changing, but people's perception of reality is about to take a big change, and it's going to be for the better once people realize what it is.
Yeah, it's awesome. I still work. I'm not full time anymore. I've worked full time for pretty much 35 years throughout my UFO research. Now I have more time to devote to this stuff. But my coworkers are coming up to me and saying, "Hey, you were right." I'm like, "I told you, I told you." So that is awesome to see. The just average person who doesn't really follow the UFO phenomena. Realizing that there's something to this. Yeah, perception is absolutely changing.
A couple of podcasters that I run in the circle with, they were talking about this, and I'm not sure which one said it. They're gonna probably yell at me for not remembering, but one of them said the water cooler conversation is about to take a big change um, Monday morning after that 60 Minutes piece aired, and I think he was absolutely right about that. I think it was the the very next day where several other news outlets were running stories about these UFOs, and it was in newspapers all over the world. I mean, it just went off like nobody. I don't even know if people in the UFO community expected it to hit that well once 60 Minutes got a hold of it. I because I heard some people saying it was almost like they were trying to downplay it, like only 9 million people tuned in to 60 Minutes. But if only 9 million people that never thought or talk about UFOs are now talking about it and thinking about it, that's a big shift in the conversation.
Yeah, it sure is. And many shows are beginning to cover it. Just recently, I was on another show I'd never in a million years thought I would ever touch, which was Keeping Up with the Kardashians. And they contacted me. I couldn't believe it. They wanted to call down UFOs. They found out that they're living in a UFO hotspot. This is the Santa Monica Mountains, Malibu, Topanga, Santa Monica, right along the Catalina coast. Huge hotspot there, and they're in the center of it. And they wanted to learn, the CE5 protocols, how to call down a UFO. So we did a little Zoom chat, and yeah, I was on one of their recent episodes, and I watched it because I was interested to see how they would portray me, and I was very happy to see that it was friendly and not debunking or ridiculing. And they, in fact, did what I told them to do, got out there, meditated, brought flashlights, and tried to call one down. And they did. They absolutely brought down an unexplained anomalous light, probably a spacecraft, which again is doing their publicity agenda. So the ETs got on the Keeping Up with the Kardashians as part of their agenda to announce their presence to, more and more people. So this is absolutely an idea whose time has come. It's time people know that we are not alone. We've never been alone. We're just one tiny planet among an infinite number of planets. There's an extraterrestrial parade out there surrounding our planet. They're out there in very large numbers. And I'm very interested to see how this disclosure rolls out coming up next month, because it could lead to a huge wave of sightings.
Yeah, that would be really interesting to see that because, as the consciousness level of people start to elevate, as the awareness level, I should say, starts to elevate about this topic, um, is there a potential for more of these sightings to occur? Um, Before you answer that question, uh, Vicky Ronzoni, who lives in Northern California, is curious to know where the hotspots are so she could go find some. And then Santa Maria asks, "Wait, you can call down UFOs? I did not know this." So, um, where are some of the hotspots that people could go to potentially see these? And if you can direct people to learn more about, calling the UFOs so that they can get a sighting of their own. Um, talk
As,
about that a little bit.
yeah, as far as Northern California, hi. Gosh, I'm not sure I can really speak authoritatively on that. I do know there's quite a few encounters up there. California is the leading producer of UFO reports in the United States. But specifically Northern California, Redding comes to mind because I think there's been a number of reports there. But each state does seem to have their hot spot. And I know that California has at least a couple in Southern California, certainly the Santa Catalina Channel. This speaks towards, the subject of this show, UFOs in water.
Well,
And, and
the intended subject of
yeah.
this episode, but I think we gone way in a different direction. So it's fine though. We can just keep talking about this.
But pushing again towards that, the desert area of Southern California is also a major hotspot. And by that I mean Joshua Tree in the Mojave Desert, the areas surrounding Edwards Air Force Base, or for that matter, any Air Force base, seems to attract UFOs. So that's another place. Like Nevada would be the area surrounding Area 51. Colorado has a major hotspot, the San Luis Valley, which is also desert, by the way, largely. Arizona, I would point to Sedona. So New York, I would point to upstate New York, the Hudson Valley area. I think if you research each state, you'll find that there's certain areas that have a higher incidence of UFO activity. And these are what we would call hotspots. this can be a social phenomena as well, because one well-publicized report can snowball into a bunch of others and sort of make the impression that this area is quite active, when as near as I can tell, every place on Earth is being visited. The UFO reporting centers like NUFORC, National UFO Reporting Center, and MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, get multiple reports daily, over a dozen. And 1 in 10 people, and I'm being generous, reports their UFOs. It's probably closer to 1 in 100. So it's very easy to say, I think I can say with some confidence, that there are 100 to 200 reports easily coming in, or occurring rather, daily, because most people don't report it. So this phenomena is it's far, far more active than people realize. It's just not a lot of people are talking about it. So
I have heard statistics that 90% of sightings go unreported. So only 10% of what is actually reported, or what is actually reported, is only 10% of the sightings that occur.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think it might even be, less. It might be 2%, 3%, 5%. Because honestly, that's a question I always ask people, and they almost never call the police or the Air Force or UFO Reporting Center, which they don't even know about often. Because, let's face it, MUFON, while it's the biggest organization, only has a few thousand members. It's under 10,000. It's never been over 10,000. It's like 6 or 4, which baffles me. I don't know why it's not more popular. But there's a very strong ridicule factor, and there's a very ruthless cover-up. That's part of the reason. So yeah, it's far, far more active than I think people realize. And getting to the second question, as far as calling down UFOs, yes, this is something I noticed very early on in my research. I wrote an article for UFO magazine called "Calling All UFOs," because I had interviewed this guy who worked for NBC, Arnie Weiler. He did, special effects and set dressing, and he was working for NBC, and had gone down to Santa Monica to set up lights in the shape of a peacock's tail, the NBC icon, and they were using pitchel lights, which are lights you can computerize, and they're very large. They set this thing up in the shape of essentially a half disc or a 3/4 disc with colored lights, turned it on, and 2 UFOs came swooping down to examine it. And Arnie turns to Rick Liebert, the guy who was setting up this display, and he's like, "Oh my God, look at those UFOs." And Rick Liebert says, "Oh yeah, that happens every time I set my lights up." And after I interviewed Arnie, I'm like, "You have to put me in touch with Rick Liebert." And he did. And I interviewed Rick Liebert, who verified that incident and told me another in San Diego, which he set up a laser on top of what was then the tallest building in San Diego. This was back in the late 70s. A green argon laser flashing in time to music. And that brought down 2 UFOs. So I wrote an article very early on for UFO Universe magazine calling all UFOs. And that was sort of one of the first times people were actually talking about that you can call down UFOs. And it's become increasingly popular. Stephen Greer, I think, was the real first person to really take the bull by the horns with this. He formed the group CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and formed chapters in most states. I remember he came here to LA, and I was part of that group, and we called down UFOs. Our group of a core members, about 10 people or so. Well, actually, the first night, Stephen Greer was there, and we went out into the field, and I couldn't believe it. A UFO came down. I mean, I was flabbergasted. It was quite high up there, but it was an unexplained light. It certainly wasn't a shooting star or a satellite or a plane or a balloon or blah, blah, blah. It is absolutely possible to call down UFOs using lights and meditation and sort of, I would say, visualizations or putting the thought out there. These ETs are very telepathic. They will respond to that. There's very specific sort of protocols people use, but it works, absolutely works.
So is there, because I think Stephen Greer put some videos out on how to do his CE5 protocols, um, but there seems to be a lot of negative perception of Stephen Greer recently. So I don't know if you want to point people in his direction or not, or is there some other way that people can learn to do these techniques in order to experience a sighting for themselves? Is there a
Yeah, yeah,
book or video?
yeah. There are. I think if you just go online and just type in, CE5, there is a best-selling book, a CE5 handbook that's doing quite well. And I neither endorse nor, one way or the other, various researchers. Uh, I think Stephen Greer's done some good work. I do know that people in this field, controversy does tend to surround them, particularly if they become highly visible figures. Uh, but you don't need to pay, hundreds of dollars to go to a CE5 seminar to learn how to do this. This is something anybody can do in their backyard. You don't need to go out into the wilderness to a major hot spot. You can just climb onto your roof. You can go into your backyard. I think it is best if you go outside. Most people who see UFOs are outside. That may sound like, you know, sort of a stupid thing to say, but it's absolutely true. If you want to see a UFO, you're going to have to go outside and look for them. And the best way to do it, I think, is to go to a hot spot, bring a very powerful flashlight. It doesn't have to be a searchlight or anything, just a nice 12 volt, or you can even get some of these hunters lights, which are 500,000 candle watt, and they are brilliant. I mean, you can see these lights from many miles away. I don't recommend laser pointers. Talking to a number of contactees, said that no, don't use those. The ETs don't like them. And for that matter, it's illegal to point them at aircraft. So I don't recommend that. But how to do it is really simply a matter of going out there and asking for it mentally. Really put out the thought, put some emotion behind it, do it regularly, be very disciplined about it. It might not happen on your first try, but I've done this with groups of people. I did this for the Learning Channel. I took them out into the Santa Monica Mountains, and I found a recipe that works really well is to bring someone who's a UFO virgin, never seen one before, and someone who's a contactee who has regular contact and has sort of a mental telepathic connection with ETs. That seems to bring them down. That time I brought the Learning Channel out there, the cameramen were just changing their film. They had to, or their batteries had run out in their cameras, because we were out in the wilderness. We didn't have plugs to plug into or electrical outlets, and they just as were changing their film or changing their batteries, and that's when the UFOs came swooping down. So sometimes they aren't always amenable to being filmed. Many times people's cameras will fail, and I don't think that's a coincidence. But I wouldn't worry so much about that. This is not hard to do. It's just a matter of putting that thought out there that you want to see a UFO. Please, can I see one? And if you put that thought out strong enough and consistently enough, it will happen. I'm pretty confident.
Well, in so there's I'm so sorry. Some of the comments in the chat room were distracting me. So Timmy E wants me to ask you about Fatima. Are you familiar with that case?
Yeah, I sure am. This was one of the most widely viewed UFO events in all of human history, and it's been interpreted as a religious miracle. But modern day researchers are looking into this, and I think Jacques Vallée was the first who's like, hey, there's got a lot of elements that point towards this possibly being a UFO encounter. And I think he's probably right.
Did
And
you say that Jacques Vallée thought that was possibly an ET encounter?
yeah, he was the first to look. Well, Jacques Vallée has sort of circled around various theories uh, as, as the cause of this phenomena, but he was the first to point out that there are very strong religious elements to UFO encounters, some of them. But he has also said that perhaps these aren't all ETs. He's also said perhaps they are. So I think he's a bit on the fence. I haven't talked to him personally, but he's the one who really put forth that theory that these are not necessarily extraterrestrials. That could be some sort of intelligence. I'm not sure if he's the first. John Keel as well. Uh, Jerome Clark and Lauren Coleman and others have also raised this possibility. But the Fatima incident is amazing. This was like, gosh, I think 1917, I think it was 16, 18, right around there. And this took place over a period of days, over a week, in which phenomena was sighted. A very large, glowing disc-like object. It had what little sort of what we might call angel hair coming down. People felt heat. There were some healings reported. It had a lot of the elements that we see in UFO encounters, and this was witnessed, I think, on the first day by like 10 to 20, but by the final incident, there was some 40,000 people there who saw this. This was very widely viewed, and some people are interpreting it now as a UFO encounter because there are some firsthand eyewitness descriptions which describe a metallic surface to this saucer-shaped object. Uh, Many describe it as sort of a fiery disk. Well, we hear that all the time with UFO reports. Yeah, I am of the mind that this probably was UFO related, but I've looked into angels and demons for that matter, and I have to tell you the demonic phenomena is real. There are bad ghosts. I don't think it has anything to do with UFOs. I think that's
Well,
hauntings.
just
But
for clarity, let's not use the term bad ghost and demonic in the same sentence because they are two different things.
yeah, there's supposedly demons are non-human spirits,
Right.
and for that matter, angels as well. There's very compelling evidence for angels. But I don't know. I don't know. This is all very new areas of research. I talked to a contactee who I wrote about in one of my books. I call her Lynette. She has had encounters her whole life, and with Greys, and the Greys take her on board. She's had babies with them, the whole deal, and they gave her an enormous amount of information, many messages, which not a lot of people get. They told her we have to stop polluting our planet. Our wars are going to kill us. We're on the same pathway they were to destruction. We need to stop putting out the greed and negativity. They told her that they've been manipulating genetics of humans for a very long time and animals. They told her that they've upgraded the emotional intelligence of specifically dogs and cats so that they can be better companions for humans. They told her that if people should start disappearing from this planet, it's being done by them for the universal good. And speaking towards the Fatima incident, they told her that many of the incidents that we've interpreted as angels was actually them. So I don't know. This is very hard to make sense of, particularly the historical cases where you can't interview firsthand witnesses anymore.
Right. It would be interesting if there was a new sighting similar to that, where you have so many witnesses, and so much. Just there were so many credible witnesses too. It was not like it's been in my mind. It's been like compared to a religious experience for people. Um, which could lend people to assume that there was 40,000 people massed together, meditating, and they hallucinated and saw this thing, right? That could be a conclusion of somebody. But event took place over multiple days, or was it weeks?
The Fatima incident was days. Yeah.
Okay. So
Um,
it wasn't just a group of people that came together and started having a religious experience. It grew and grew over a period of days because the word spread so fast, and this thing continued to reappear in the same spot. Is that what it was?
yep. The appearance was predicted. That's another thing that comes up in UFO encounters predictions. They actually gave them warnings as well of future uh, tragedies, I guess, like I think one of the predictions given the Fatima predictions, one was the fall of the church or the decline of the church, which we are seeing. Religion is losing its sway over the populace to a certain extent. People are becoming much more scientifically minded over the years, and religion has become less popular, certainly, than it was 200 years ago or 100 years ago, even. But yeah, there's absolutely a very strong spiritual aspect to all of this. And I agree that people do sometimes look at this as a spiritual experience. And I looked into a bunch of cases in which people have actually seen, and this is controversial and not meaning to, inflame anybody, but people have reported this. I'm just saying this objectively because it has happened. People have reported seeing Jesus on board a UFO. It's a very small number of cases, but it has turned up. Angels as well, Mother Mary, Saint Michael. There, so I'm not sure if this is religious beliefs playing a role. We know that ETs can disguise themselves. There's put screen memories. They've dressed up as everything from superheroes to teddy bears. People come away from an experience thinking they saw an owl or a deer or a wolf or a vampire or you name it. So perhaps that's what's going on in some of
Could
these cases.
could that be partly because the human brain is designed to protect us from trauma? So instead of seeing something that our brain can't explain, our mind says, you know what this is.
Yeah,
And so it replaces the image of this strange creature that we can't explain with an image that we already know. So could it be that it's our own brain manifesting the image, um, and replacing it what they're actually seeing?
yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think J. Allen Hynek of Project Blue Book, he's one of the first to sort of look into this, and he called that process theory escalation. Because people are like, oh, that's a helicopter. And your mind does overlay an actual image of something you think it would be. But when it persists, when this UFO stays there, that fades away. It's not a helicopter. And people will go through this whole list of things like, what is this? Shooting stars? Is this a comet? Is this a helicopter? Is this a balloon? I'm trying to put a label on it. And this is when the fear starts to creep in and people will sometimes look away. They do not want to have their worldview challenged because it can cause, emotional trauma and mental anguish when you are seeing something that you cannot categorize, period. And we've seen this. I think there was a story from Captain Cook, the explorer, where people off the coast of, I think it was Hawaii or something, or Australia, the native indigenous population couldn't even see the ships because they just could not conceive of
Right.
that.
Yeah,
So
I've heard that mentioned, in relation to the UFO phenomena, where you can't see something if you don't really know what it is. In fact, it was Tim McMillan, um, who's one of the founders of the Debrief, that wrote, or that was actually, I heard him talking about it, um, that there's very little evidence of anyone talking about the color blue centuries ago. So it's like they didn't really see the color blue because there was no word for it. I'm totally butchering his hypothesis on that. But it was really interesting for him to say that people can't describe something, and their brain will block that from their um, mental image of what they're seeing because they can't explain it or can't describe it.
Yeah, this is one of the theories for missing time, which I think comes from two angles. One is the ETs telling people you won't remember. And I think we have good evidence of that, that they are superb hypnotists and will block the memory of an experience from people's minds. But on the same hand, I know other people who were told by the ETs, like, it's not us, it's your mind doing it. And that people, and we see this with people in other situations, perhaps like child abuse. People will not even realize that they've had severe child abuse until they become adults, and these memories start to flood back in. Or war trauma victims, or anyone, assault victims, will sometimes completely bury that memory in their subconscious just because it's traumatic. So perhaps that's some of what is going on here as well.
Okay, well, so let's change gears a little bit and go um, back on topic a little bit because the Fatima stuff was interesting, and people were asking about it. It was relevant, but we started to go into the direction of hotspots. I wanted to ask you if you can recommend where people could, like, is there a database or is there information where people could look up hotspots that are near them so that they could go out and try to witness or have a sighting?
Yeah, I'd say the two most probably useful and available databases would be the ones I already mentioned, the National UFO Reporting Center. You just type in NUFORC, NUFORC, that um, will be able to call it up on the internet, and you can reference sightings by date or location. And you can also type in keywords and perhaps a city or a area and see how often that comes up. And that would be a really good method of perhaps finding a very specific location where there's a lot of activity. This does seem to come in waves, so it's a good idea to sort of keep current on it and look for where activity is going on at a certain time. Because like a musician or an author doing a concert tour or a book tour, that's what the ETs do. They go from location to location and sort of show themselves off. I remember there was a period of time where an area in Alabama was having all kinds of activity. And remember Gulf Breeze? That was super active in the early 90s and not so much now. And Hudson Valley. So we just have to find the area that's active at any one particular time. But yeah,
Yeah,
move.
the flaps are opportunities for people to, massive sightings to happen. Um, but it seems like there are more and more groups of people that are going out and initiating human, I guess it's called human initiated contact.
Yeah.
And they're doing this in groups. There's groups, actually, there is a group in Las Vegas uh, that I'm aware of. I've never connected with them, but you can go on meetup.com, I think, and look for UFO groups in your area. Um, you can also, like you were saying, use keywords. So UFO sightings and then the city, or UFO researchers and the city, so that you could connect with local people who may have more knowledge about the activity in that area, and then they could point you in the direction of where you
Yeah,
could go.
yeah. If you really want to see a UFO, one of the best methods I've used is hooking up with a contactee, and that has been successful for me. Boy, one lady, she took me out to see a UFO, and it came down big time. One of my best sightings ever. I'll never forget it. This was just off the 210 freeway in Pasadena. I'm like, I want to see a UFO. She says, all right, I'll arrange it. And she was totally serious. She's in telepathic contact. She said, and I have to believe her, because we went up this little hill and a UFO showed up, and it was 100 feet away, 50 feet off the ground, well, 20 feet off the ground,
Wow.
big as a house, lit up with all these beautiful, beautiful colored lights. It was the most gorgeous thing I've ever seen. I mean, this thing was brilliant.
What was the shape?
Perfect sphere.
Okay.
Yep. Totally silent, real close, no mistaking it. I mean, there was no chance of misperception here. It was that close. I mean, like across the street, close.
So we did not get to a lot of the stuff that I wanted to cover, Preston. I'm not going to let you go yet, but if I was to start in on the topic that we actually decided to talk about before we started this episode, it's going to take us another hour to 90 minutes. Uh, I don't want to keep you here that late. Um, so will you agree to come back on in maybe a couple of weeks when I have a free open spot, and it'll be a Saturday night again, so that we could talk about the desert UFOs and the water UFOs and do some comparisons?
yeah, Saturday night's all right. Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely. You're kidding? I love talking about this subject.
Right on. Well, I am down for that too, but let's continue on the topics that we've already started talking about. I'll schedule another episode so that we could go into that, and dig down on those areas specifically, because I've really got some um, interesting questions, and I want to get into some theorizing and comparisons when it comes to that stuff. So we'll continue that conversation, but let's continue this conversation tonight, um, for at least another 20-30 minutes. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. And the chat room's been so on fire, man. I haven't even been able to keep up with all the questions that you guys have coming at me. I apologize for that. Um, Plus, I'm so fascinated with what Preston's talking about. It's hard for me to concentrate on what the chat room is saying. Um, but let me see what we got here real quick. Continue talking about your sighting where you saw the sphere, and just describe a little bit more about like what you thought when you saw it. How did you feel? And did you experience any telepathic messages like a lot of contactees do?
Not on that occasion. I have on others, at least two or three times that I can think of. On that particular occasion, I really wasn't expecting anything to happen because I have gone out with other contactees and nothing showed up. And we had just reached the top of the hill, and this lady, I'll call her Wendy, she doesn't want her real name used. Uh, she's still in contact, by the way, with ETs. She grabs my arm and says, "Look!" and spins me around. And yeah, it's right there. And I was amazed. I was so happy. I felt no fear from this thing. I didn't get any specific messages. Many people have gotten messages during sightings like, do not be afraid. We won't hurt you. Even simple sightings, people will get that message. Uh, but I just remember feeling complete awe and thinking how beautiful this thing is. And it wasn't a super long sighting. I mean, this thing hung there for about, I'm going to say 20 seconds, maybe not even quite that long. But that's a long time when you're looking at something that close to you. I mean, this thing was, you had to look up and down and side to side to see the whole thing. It was that close. So it was huge, much bigger than your average house, maybe two houses, three houses put together. And after just a few seconds, it started to move very slowly off to the sort of, let's see, I guess it would be the southwest, curving around this mountain that we were climbing up. Not a mountain, but a large hill. And started moving faster and faster. And then suddenly it zips around this hill super fast, so fast that it left a tracer. And I could just see this orange line sort of as it zipped around so fast that I'm like, wow. And that was just one of my favorite sightings I've ever had, and absolutely unexplained.
Was
Completely
there
forgot.
up to that point? Did you have any doubts left in your mind, or were you already 100% convinced that this phenomena or this phenomenon was real? Uh,
100% convinced because I'd had prior sightings that
oh,
were all,
okay, okay.
yeah,
So this was just another confirmation for you. Not. It wasn't like the shift from being a kind of on the fence to knowing that they're real. This was like just confirmation that you had already known it was real, right?
right, right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
kind of dived in the deep end when I got involved in this phenomenon. I'm like just interviewing people who had gray encounters from day one. But my first sighting was just an anomalous light down after a UFO group meeting in Santa Monica. There was a contactee, and he called one down. I couldn't believe it, but it was a shooting star-like object, and somewhat ambiguous. And I was a bit on the fence about it, even though he sort of pointed to the sky and said, "Here it's coming, watch there," and it came. So that was mind blowing. But my real aha moment was in 1992, July, when I had a small orb come shooting down out of the sky in front of my car. Thought it was a bird at first, and then I'm thinking it's a firecracker. It was late July, but it wasn't. It was an orb, and it came right in front of my windshield. And I was stopped. I mean, I stopped my car, and this thing was going back and forth and back and forth, 3 times perhaps, maybe two, and it went straight up. But that was my aha moment. That was the moment where I couldn't go back. I'd seen one. It was unexplained. No one can tell me different. You can argue all you want with me. I know what I saw. I don't know what it was, but I know I saw something I can't explain.
That's the position of every contactee that I've ever talked with. Is they know what they saw. It's There's no doubt in their mind that it was not something human made. You said you had a telepathic experience. Was that multiple times or one specific time?
It's happened a couple of times. By the way, I'm going to be speaking at the Laughlin UFO Mega Conference up in the
Oh,
first. I
cool.
think it's the first week of June or the second week.
Yeah, that's right
Uh,
around the corner.
so I'm going to be talking about my own experiences with UFOs for the first time, and out of body experiences, and this whole contact modalities. But yeah, the telepathic experience was actually with that same lady, the same contactee. I was in my condo where I lived in Canoga Park at that time, transcribing her interview. And she had just, I'd interviewed her, and she described how she had been woken up one evening and there was grays surrounding her bed. She wasn't happy. She's scared to death. She jumped up and kicked one in the neck, and its neck snapped. And it fell down, and it stopped that particular abduction. And they quickly scooped up that fallen gray and disappeared through the wall. And she had been telling me about hybrid babies and healings and just stuff that was hard for me to absorb. I was still relatively new to this phenomena. And I'm thinking, is she for real? I knew she was. I'd met her face to face. She was absolutely sincere, but I just couldn't quite get there. And I'm vacillating. And that's when I got a really strong impulse that I could not resist, to run onto the roof of my condo. And this is not allowed. You're not allowed to go up there. And I've been up there, but I don't live there now. But it's not something I ever really did. But it was such a strong impulse, I couldn't resist it, which is so funny to me because I've had people tell me this and I never quite understood it. I'm like, really? What does that feel like? And I'm questioning about it. Well, I know what it feels like. You just have to go. And I wasn't even thinking, why, or is this even related to what I'm doing? But it was. And I ran up onto the roof of my condo and thinking to myself, what the heck am I doing here? I'm looking to the north over sort of Chatsworth and the Canoga Park area, and a light appeared. and it gave me a very strong telepathic message. First time I've ever felt anything like that. I can tell you for sure I've never had anything like that before. And it gave me a message that was meant just for me. And it said, uh, in so many, not in so many words, but just a real strong impression. It's like, hi, we're Wendy's ETs. You don't believe, huh? Watch this. That was the message. And this huge globe of orange light, sort of a fiery orange globe, starts darting back and forth, back and forth, back and forth in real tight angles, as if to prove like this is not anything you've seen before. And it was, again, a quick sighting, maybe 30 seconds, and it disappeared. But it was close. It was right across the street, right over the LA River there, and right over these palm trees. So, and actually went behind them so it was below treetop level. And yeah, ETs came for a message and proved that Wendy was not lying to me. Oh, you bet I called her up and says, "You're not going to believe what happened." And that's when I told her I'd want to see a UFO. She's like, "You just saw one." I'm like, "But I wasn't ready. I didn't realize that they were really going to show up."
Yeah.
If you're going to if you're really in contact, let's do this. And she did. She actually showed them to me.
That's an interesting or a continuing theme or a common theme where people feel a compulsion to go somewhere and then they have an experience. Is this something that you've found in talking with a lot of the people you've talked with,
Yeah,
that they feel this like compelled to go to a specific location and then something happens?
yeah, particularly contactees or people who've been taken on board a craft will feel compelled to leave their house and drive out of town, or to go into the backyard, or to take an exit off the freeway that they weren't quite meaning to take, uh, or to just look out the window even. So that is actually quite common.
A couple questions while you were talking. I didn't want to interrupt you, but how old were you when you had your first sighting? And also, the couple people asked about if you could talk about the girl who kicked the ET in the neck. Why did she kick him? What describe that event, I guess.
All right. Well, my first sighting, let me think for a second. I'm going to say I was about 23 years
Oh,
old.
just a few years after you started looking into it.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much right after. Didn't take long. And I think if you investigate this sighting, and this is what I've seen with a lot of people, that as soon as they become interested in this phenomena, they'll have a sighting. Or for some people, it's having a sighting which brings them in,
Yeah.
but it works just as much the other way. Uh, and so yeah, I was pretty young when I had my first sighting, and I've had sightings pretty regularly after that. Every couple of years, it seems like they'll show up just with a little howdy do, to just let me know they're there. And took me years to realize that on some level I am, what I guess you would call a contactee. I don't have clear memories of being on board a craft, but I have some weird dreams. And I'm going to go into a lot of that in my uh, presentation at Laughlin, because, yeah, I've got some really cool stuff that has happened to me. But as far as Wendy, oh my God, I have very few people have I interviewed who have had that level of contact. I am working with a lady right now from Florida who's beyond that. I mean, she has 100% full conscious contact on a regular basis. She has an encyclopedic knowledge of what these grays are like. But Wendy started out with, like many people, very fearful. She was having missing time, and it was quite concerning to her. Whenever she'd move to a new location, there'd be a wave of sightings over her house. Neighbors would see it. Her family were witnesses, her friends. A lot of people around her had seen UFOs, but she was clearly the Typhoid Mary or the magnet of these encounters. And it was concerning her because she was having all kinds of weird stuff happen. Uh, Lots of missing time, lots of close-up sightings, figures coming into her room that she was very fearful for her in the beginning. She finally booby-trapped her room. She put like tacks on the floor and tried to tie the door closed, and hung pots and pans from ropes so that they would clang if anyone came near her. She was put baby powder on the floor to try to catch their tracks. Tried all these different things to catch them in the act. And so, yeah, it was very scary for her in the beginning. Then at one point, she had diagnosed with a cyst in her fallopian tube, had to have surgery. Day before surgery, she had contact and went to the doctor the next day, and they were pretty upset. The doctors accused her of having had surgery. They could not find her tumor. And Wendy denied it. She said, I didn't. She kind of knew what happened, although she didn't have clear memory of it. It was some time before she really started to wake up to what was happening to her, and she came around 180 degrees and feels like these guys are her friends, and they're absolutely friendly, and she feels very loving feelings from them. She now remembers being taken on board as a child and being taught by them how to do telekinesis, how to do healing. She did a healing on me, and I could feel the energy coming through her hands. No kidding. Like electricity or like water flowing through the inside of you. You could physically heal it. She's a really remarkable woman.
So she was, through her contact, she has been endowed with the ability to heal people with her hands. Is that what you're
Yes.
saying?
Yep.
Wow.
Has done so effectively. She brought a girl out of a coma. She healed someone of not diabetes, but gestational diabetes. They were pregnant and having a lot of problems, and she helped their blood level. So
The the idea that people have been healed by their contact with these entities is another common theme, I think. Well, maybe not as common as some of the other themes, but there are cases where people have been healed. I think even, are you familiar with Bob McGuire? He's a scientist.
no, can't say that I am.
He's um, I know he's on Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. He's on that show, but he has gone out to Chris Bledsoe's place. You know who Chris Bledsoe is?
Oh yeah, met him. Really nice guy. He was healed.
And well, apparently he has the healing ability or as Bob McGuire put it, he Bob went out there to, you know what, I'm telling somebody else's story and I'm going to butcher it. So please go check out Bob McGuire's story and his interaction with Chris Bledsoe, because apparently his wife was healed of some kind of a disease that she had had for a long time, and it's never come back since that happened. Um, that's
Yeah,
a really compelling testimony because that dude is a legit scientist.
yeah. Chris Bledsoe's case is no joke. He had Crohn's disease. Was heavily medicated. Everyone knew he had it. I mean, he was not bedridden, but certainly not able to be active, and was absolutely healed. Overnight. I mean, even less, instantly. I think would be even a fair statement, and it is common. Edith Fiore said 50%. In my own files, I think it's closer to 20%, maybe, but it's absolutely a consistent feature. In fact, my latest book, Wondrous, which I just came out, Wondrous 25 True UFO Encounters, there's a lady who I wrote about who had a very extensive contact, and she enjoys excellent health. Her children have never gotten sick, but she's also had healing. She's done healings for people. It was an ability that just sort of manifested. She could see auras. She could tell where a person was sick. And she has a whole stack of gifts from people who she's healed. This is very common feature. People are taught psychic healing, which is very effective at times. I've had another lady, yeah, helped me.
Yeah.
So
Um, so Timmy seems to be really interested in Chris Bledsoe's stories, but before you get to that, um, because you know Chris Bledsoe personally, which is cool. Chris Bledsoe has told his story numerous times. It's a fascinating story that encompasses years of experiences. We don't have enough time to go into all of that here tonight, but I'll give you an opportunity to tell about your experience meeting him, and what you thought of him, which you already did a little bit of that, but you can go more into detail. But before you do that, my question is: this is such a gift that these these beings impart onto just a very small percentage of the population. Why is it so exclusive to just a few individuals and not more widely distributed to help the rest of humanity?
uh, it's not exclusive, and it is being done to a large segment of humanity. And the reason I say that is very early on in my research, I heard a quote from J. Allen Hynek who was quoted as saying, 1 in 40 people have had an onboard experience. Didn't believe that for a second. That's what really got me to interview people on a widespread basis. And I didn't have to ask 40 people. I thought, oh my God, is our abductions widespread? And I started surveying the literature, and uh, going through the files of various researchers, what they've put forth, that you can access. And I ended up writing an article for the MUFON Journal, basically saying I think 1 in 40 people might be abductees. And it was about a year later, the Roper organization decided to do a survey. That's what they do on this subject, and they found 1 in 50. And I've started asking contactees about that. I'm like, how common do you think this is? And pretty much across the board, they say it's much, much more common than most people think. Some say, yeah, you're probably pretty close to about 1 in 40, 1 in 50, but some people say, no, no, it's much more than that. And I think that's entirely possible because I know Bud Hopkins had a client, Steve Kilburn was the pseudonym he used in his book, Missing Time. He had no memory of a sighting or missing time or anything, just a fear of a certain stretch of road. And under hypnosis, recalled being taken on board. A lot of people are having contact and they don't know it. They miss the clues. They might have just a scoop mark or some sleep paralysis or memories of figures in their room and kind of suppress it or don't want to think about it. Contact is far, far more widespread. And for that matter, when someone has a UFO sighting that is close up, and by that I mean within a couple 100 feet, treetop level next to you, chances are really good that's more than a sighting. Seriously, they can take you on board and you will never even know it. So I think the reports we have of the number of abductions is, again, far underestimated. And we do see a lot of people who manifest all kinds of psychic abilities. So I think it's probably far more common. But yeah, I'm not sure it's everybody. I'm not sure why they choose one person over another. I've told the patterns I see. People who are doing good work for humanity, I think that's one of the type of people they do come forth and try to help. But yeah, it's hard to make sense of. This is still a very new field. We're still learning.
Okay, yeah, that was a really good answer. I was really more trying to focus on the aspect of the healing ability, or the healing cases where people have been healed of either terminal diseases or Chris Bledsoe's um, case, a very debilitating disease. Um, but and then also the psychic abilities; those are imparted onto to individuals. Um,
Yeah, I love the
But
healing cases. I've got documented over 300. And I
yeah,
think that's the tip of the iceberg. And
okay,
yeah, serious diseases. 30 cases of cancer, by the way.
wow.
Tumors, diabetes, diphtheria, tuberculosis, Crohn's disease, jaundice, heart disease, uh, you name it, ulcers. It just goes on and on and on.
Um, well, I mean, the chat room is going to hate me for this, but I really want to start winding this down. Um, but we are going to have you back on. I'm I'm going to get in contact with you right after this program. We'll schedule another time and day uh, within 2 or 3 weeks from now. Okay,
Yeah, you got it.
because like we could sit here and talk about Chris Bledsoe's experiences for a couple of hours. We could talk about so many things. There's so much to talk about with this topic. Um, But in your meeting with Chris Bledsoe and uh, having a firsthand experience meeting somebody who's had such immense amount of long-term contact, uh, what was your impression of him and just his experiences? What was your overall impression?
Yeah, my first impression was how much he reminds me of other contactees who like Terry Lovelace. I had the same impression with him. They're very kind, very loving, very polite, a little bit shy, a little reserved, not super like outgoing perhaps, or I don't even want to say that, but like not like
Introvert?
yeah, more introverted, not like trying to preach out and like say to the world, believe me, believe me. No, they're not trying to convince anyone of their story. They're just trying to tell their story. And if you believe it, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine. Very, very kind man, very sweet, very gentle, really intelligent. He struck me as being very intelligent, well spoken, and just a overall great guy. And that's something I do see with contactees. They're really wonderful people, just people who care about the environment, people, people who really, really care about animals. Oh boy, that comes up all the time. They're big animal people, very much concerned with the state of our planet, very much concerned about self-improvement and the improvement of all humanity. Just very empathetic, very psychic. Um, yeah, sparkle in his eyes. He was a great guy.
Hmm. That's great because I've seen him talk, and just in hearing him talk, he does seem like a very mellow, laid back person, um, just at ease with his experiences, and it doesn't sound to me like he's trying to convince anybody. It's not like he's out there telling his story. People ask him to share his experiences, right? Is that
Yeah,
kind of how you felt?
I think as a general rule, contactees are reluctant to do public speaking. No one really likes public speaking. I don't. I mean, I enjoy it. Don't get me wrong. I've become comfortable with it. But yeah, I think that they are just trying to tell their story. They're not trying to get attention, uh, but really want to help people.
Uh, yeah, and that's the way he comes across. And I have heard Terry Lovelace talk too. He comes across the same way. Just e- exceptionally humble person, and somebody who doesn't have an agenda. But somebody who was asked to share his experience and feels almost an obligation to share it because, uh, as a person who's had these experiences, he feels grateful that he's had these experiences, and he feels kind of an obligation to share those experiences. Not
Yeah,
like he's
I've heard
trying
of
to
that.
preach it up and try to convert people to some kind of a religion. That's my not my impression anyway of
Yeah,
what these guys are doing.
yeah. Contactees do feel compelled to share their story. I hear that quite a bit.
Yeah. And it's understandable, man, because like I said before, it does seem like such a gift that these people have been imparted, and to keep that to yourself. First of all, it seems like the people that are being contacted, or contactees, um, from your description, they're not people that are bolsterous, or going around with a big ego and trying to be the center of attention to start with. Right? Is that accurate?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So, um, so they're given this gift, and they want to just share it with as many people as they can, to let people know that there's more than just this experience on Earth. That there's more to this world, to this universe, than what we can see with our eyes and feel, touch, and hear. Right?
Yeah. I will say one thing: they're not all introverts. I have talked to some contactees who are bubbly, outgoing, very fun. Life of the party type. So I mean, it really does cross the board in terms of types of people. But yeah, there does seem to be a really common feature of people. They're very kind, I would say, would be one thing that I see quite often, or almost always.
Okay. Well, so let's end this with you give me your final thoughts. Basically sum up what we talked about, and then tell people how they can contact you or learn more about your books and about your work.
Yeah, I would say in summation, I think UFOs are good news for humanity. I think if you really study this phenomena, you will see that. Uh, I think that it's an important subject. You may not be personally affected, but actually you are, because if we were to have this technology released, we would solve our energy crisis, our economic crisis, our environmental crisis pretty quickly. We just really need to come together on this. I think disclosure will happen. I don't think our government's going to be completely forthcoming, so we still need to put pressure on all governments in the world. We need to really come together as a species and grow up, wake up our psychic abilities. I think that's very important. I do think that we're probably going to be looking at open official contact within this generation. I think there's going to be more very widespread sightings. And as far as contacting me, yeah, I do have a website. If you just use the search engine on my name, it should take you there. PrestonDennett.weebly.com. Got a brand new book out called Wondrous: 25 True New UFO Encounters. And you can contact me through my website as well. My books are available on Amazon. I'm going to be speaking at the Laughlin Conference. And yeah, I mean, I'm not giving up. I want to see the Roswell Craft in the Museum. Until then,
Yeah,
I'm gonna be pushing this.
yeah, I'm in agreement with you, man. And your voice needs to be heard by many more people. Um, and I can't thank you enough for the time that you come and spend with me on these conversations that we have. It's just a pure joy for me to talk to you, and your wealth of knowledge is endless, man. And I'm looking forward to having you back on. I think um, actually, once I end this, you and I can take a couple minutes after the end of the stream, figure out what day we're going to do it, and then I'll start promoting it as soon as I get an opportunity. I got a couple of shows this week that I got to prep for, but I'll be promoting the next show that you and I have as soon as I can get around to it.
Very cool. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Very cool. So thank you to everybody who was in the chat room tonight. You guys were amazing. I really appreciate all the questions and comments, and I apologize that I couldn't get to them all. I do hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. And Preston, once again, thank you so much, man. And I look forward to talking to you again.
Hey,
Have a,
my pleasure. Thank you.
yeah, have a good night, everybody.